On today's podcast, we'll talk about learning about camera operators at 12 years old, watching movies with your mom, sneakers, Pleasantville, and of course, when Robert Redford asks to use your secret fort. Just a little bit of business before we start. There may be a curse word here or there in this episode, so please listen responsibly. As always, our website, theop.io, is up and chock full of tips, tricks, and gooey operator goodness. Make sure to check out The Breakdown, where the best operators in the biz explain shots they have done, The Musings, where we discuss everything from quick tips to larger concepts of storytelling, the answers, the images, and so much more. I may or I may not take a break or two during this episode, but I promise that none of them will be longer than 22 seconds. Finally, if you are enjoying the podcast, please follow us, write a review, share us with your parents, and talk us up around the water cooler with your friends. So grab a beverage, sit back, and enjoy the op. Thanks for listening.
Lock it up, nice and quiet, and let's roll.
Rolling. Victor 30 Echo, take 2.
Hey, Mark. Hey, Mark.
And camera set. And action.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Op Podcast, the podcast where we talk about operating and the art of visual storytelling. I am Dave Comaides, your host, and as always, I'm very excited today to have a great camera operator and a friend, Henry Cline. Henry has done a lot of things throughout his career, hopefully many of which he'll talk to us about, but just a smattering. Castle Rock, Nip Tuck, Team America, World Police, I Heart Huckabees, The Sum of All Fears, State and Main, Sneakers, which I always ask everybody about, Tremors, which I worked on, and I got to find out what working on set was like. In 1997, he won the Feature Film Award for Cinematography for a movie called Colin Fitz Lives, which he said is the best movie that nobody's ever seen, for the Austin Film Festival. He's an exceptionally talented and intelligent individual and just a great all-around guy. Henry, thanks for being here.
I think we should just say that's a wrap, right?
And we're out.
I don't think I can add anything to your lovely introduction.
Great to see you. We're over the internet, by the way. Anybody who's listening. So tell me your story. How'd you get into the film industry?
I recently had been working on it for about 5 years. This blog post that I recently put up on my blog, which gets about 5 posts a year. Oh no, 5 posts like a decade.
Wait, what's the web address for it?
It's called interactivehank.com. It's one of the many blogs that I take care of for people, but mostly for myself.
Okay.
But it's just musings and ruminations on things that interest me, but it's very seldom. But this one had meant a lot to me because it was about how I developed my love of cinema and I believe was inoculated with creative skills towards that lend themselves specifically towards operating and setting a frame. And so I'm kind of run through that post in my head. It's really what I always tell people is that I grew up, born in the early 60s, and by the late 60s, my mom was taking me to see pretty much any film that was out there.
Cool.
And I remember of any at that time, even though there were ratings, you could still I remember her arguing with the ticket booth people about me going to see Clockwork Orange when I was, it came out in, I don't know, I was 10 years old or less. And she was saying, I don't care. I'm the guard. I'm his mother, of course, blah, 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 and, Kubrick is one of my the greatest filmmakers in my opinion. And I grew to love all of his films. But it's like, I don't want to go see that movie again. I've seen it many times, but it's so intense, especially the older you get and the more sensitive you get to, or that I get, to things like violence and just
sure.
So anyway, so we saw everything. And at that time in New York and there was I was recently in New York and I just was lamenting the fact that there were no, the Odeon is like the only repertory house left in New York. Yeah. And there used to be I would buy the Village Voice and there would be a whole page in the back and
Oh, I
I
remember
would
it well.
map out my week of what
Yep.
I was going to see.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I go see some Buñuel film, and then I'd go see whatever whatever it was. I mean, like and then I remember and then we would go to see midnight shows at the 8th Street Playhouse in the
Uh,
Village.
yep.
And I'll never forget one time, like we were going and we went to, yeah, this probably wasn't all one sitting, but we went to see Greaser's Palace and 200 Motels, which was a
Uh,
double feature.
oh, great.
And they got out and there was a midnight screening of a new film called Eraserhead. And it's just like, yeah, why not? Let's go for it. And it was like, and I just read that, in the obituary this morning that that film premiered on a midnight screening. And I don't know if that
Oh,
was it,
wow. So that
but
might
it
have
was
been
like,
it. But how,
it was definitely nobody had, like, it was like the first time it had run.
but how cool to see Eraserhead without any preconceived
Oh
notion
my
and just
gosh.
going, "Oh, this is a movie." Like, I mean, what a gift! Because even if you know nothing about the movie, if it's from some person that you love or whatever, you have expectations. Like, how wonderful!
And I've actually never seen it again. And it would put it in the category of Clockwork Orange. Of like, I'd be a little bit trepidatious to see it again because it freaking blew my mind. I
Yeah.
mean, it was so weird.
Wow.
And anyway, so that went on for a long time, and I developed, and I remember I started buying American Cinematographer when I was probably 11 or 12 years old. And like, people were like, what, even the guy at the newsstand was like, what are you doing? Like, what, and would read the articles, and I developed, a love affair with certain directors. And, so that just kept going. And I remember, and this was one of the things that was in the post, that I'd read an article. Maybe I made it up now, but I remember reading an article that specifically delineated that there was a camera operator whose job it was to mechanically operate the camera,
Oh,
and
wow.
they weren't the director of photography, and they weren't in charge of the lighting. And that was like, that's it. That's what I want to do for a living.
Was that the first time you really like you
Oh,
hadn't
totally. I
thought
was
about it? I mean, as your kid, you don't think about these things,
I
right? So
was
you were like,
I
"Wow,
was
someone
11 or
does that."
12 years old, and it was, and I've tried to find the article and I can't. I
Yeah.
thought it was in the New York Times Magazine section, but I I thought I'd cut a picture out from it, but the journal that I used to keep that particular one, anyway. But
Yeah.
I do remember it, and I do remember that that was the case, and I was like, that's what I want to do for a living.
How great. Oh, that's so
And
cool.
which was like, and when I tell people that, they kind of say that's amazing, because how few people do you meet that actually
Yeah. Yeah.
have that feeling. And so my life went on, and I got, I was into photography. My father was an amateur, but good for, a shutterbug. And he bought me a camera when I was probably 14 or so.
Yeah.
And I have these great pictures of us doing like grayscale tests in Central Park when I was, with him holding up an index card, a three
Yeah.
by five index card, as if it was the white card, like
It's so
20 feet
great.
away. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
this little
Yeah,
bitty piece
yeah.
of white.
That's so wonderful. Wait,
Anyway,
but backing up a sec. So
yep,
so when you read this thing about there being a camera operator, you're what, like 12, 13, something
yeah.
like that? You're in your
Mhm.
early teens. And so did you then turn around and go, because it's not like the internet was around. Like, did you then turn around and go, so how do I do this? Like, I mean, did you start going, well, how do I do this? Or did you just go, I don't know what this is, but this is where I want to be, and I'll just keep.
It was the latter. I feel like it
Yeah,
just embedded in my head because
yeah,
I was was into mechanical things. I was recently reading about somebody is like, my dad took apart everything and then would put it back together as a way to fix it. And
nice.
I literally, whatever, there's always something in my house that's disassembled. And I loathe buying, and even because if it's broken, I figure, what the heck, I might as well just take it apart and
Right.
see what's going on. So it just became like in my zeitgeist, that it was like, okay, that felt right to me. And then I just continued on. It wasn't like I had a specific, because I was still too young. I wasn't thinking about what I was going to, do for
Sure.
a living or anything like that. So, um, and then, I would basically jump to what happened then, is that I took some time off after high school. I really wasn't sure before the idea of a gap year was even in existence, but I wasn't ready to jump into college, and spent some time abroad. Um, and then eventually my sister, who was studying screenwriting at Columbia,
Hmm.
and the head of the department was a producer named Michael Hausman, who is still around and is an Academy Award winning producer of Milos Forman's films, Hair, um, you know, in,
Cool.
incredible old school New York producer.
Yeah.
Everybody loves, and was gearing up to make a movie. And she was like, "Do you want to, come and meet? Because I think he's looking for PAs." And I said, "Oh, yeah, absolutely." So I did that. And you know what? I have my timeline wrong.
Uh-oh. The whole thing's a sham.
Yeah, exactly. I went to before that happened, I went to SUNY Purchase for a year
Okay. To study film or
to
just to
study
get
film. Yeah,
general?
to the
Yeah.
film school, and that was based on I had friends that had gone through NYU, were at NYU and at
Uh-huh.
UCLA, and I was kind of like, I want to go to film school. Now's the time to
Yeah.
get. I'd been doing just. I mean, we're not even talking like working stuff, but like some freebies in New York City, PAing,
Yeah.
looking for just a friend of mine, a father of a friend of mine in Montclair, New Jersey, in my high school class was a cameraman that owned his own like BL package, and I remember I think we helped him one day do something, and it was the first time I think I'd ever seen a 35 millimeter camera, and
Oh,
that
that's
blew me
cool.
away.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, all of that was kind of like in
Yeah.
my brain.
You were dipping your toe here and there,
Right.
basically.
So I
Yeah.
took this time off. I came back. I said, okay, I'm ready to go to school. I'm going to go to film school. Um, Multiple people had kind of said, listen, Purchase is like, it is hitting this sweet spot in terms of their program because they're very gear hands on.
Cool.
Um, and so I went. I
This is
had,
like early
this
80s?
is in 80, 83,
Okay.
82,
All right.
83.
Yeah.
And I had, I had a great year. I learned a lot. One of my cinematography professors was a Russian cameraman named Yuri Naiman, who had shot Liquid Sky,
Oh,
um,
wow.
and was fascinating. He was a physicist before going to Moss Film and transitioning to being a cameraman. And he was a guy that I worked with him later on a couple of projects. And I'll just say that he had talking about disassembling items. He had taken apart his Minolta meter and then recalibrated it himself so that he could plug in the wand and then he could read to a hundredth of a within hundredths of an increments, and would give me the stop like it says T 2.146. It's like he was
And
he's a
meanwhile, you're looking at the lens going, I don't know, I guess
well,
that's
yeah, somewhere in there, right? Lovely, lovely human being that
that's wonderful.
he's still around too. He's got a couple of adventures now that he does. But so he was one of my cinematography teachers, and we hit it off. Um, and then the other person that I just was like, I still think about him. His name was Tom Gunning. I looked him up recently. He's still doing it, but he was teaching film theory, and we'd go and it was like a 3 hour class, and he'd have that the special 16 millimeter projector that you could freeze frame and go slow and backwards and forwards without burning the film.
Yeah.
And I just ate it up. Because it was just all about film language and even the stuff of like he wasn't looking at it from like how do you apply this in the real world. It was just more like somebody makes this film, and even if it's unintentional, you know, there's something you can read into it. The seminology
Yeah.
of the language of what the director and the cinematographer and the art director and the costume designer have put together is making you feel certain things. And
Do you remember? Is this like Un Chien Andalou kind of stuff, or is this like
we watched, yes,
Scorsese? And I mean, like
we
what?
watched a little bit of everything. I
Yeah,
mean, I the two I remember
I was
offhand
going to ask
were
you, is there something that stuck out to you? Yeah.
Fritz Lang's M,
Okay.
which is masterpiece.
Yeah, masterpiece.
Um, the Sun Also Rise, is it the Sun? The film that won the first Academy Award for cinematography.
Oh,
Um, the sun also rises,
the
right?
sun also rises. I think you're right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Hey there, podcast listeners. Quick interruption here after the fact. My apologies, but both Henry and I were incorrect. The movie that actually won the first Academy Award for Best Cinematography, which was actually called the Academy Award for Unique and Artistic Picture at the first Academy Awards in 1929, was actually a movie called Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, otherwise just known as Sunrise, directed by F.W. Murnau and photographed by two cinematographers, Charles Rocher and Carl Struss. Apologies about that, and now back to our podcast.
I think I've seen it restored. I've seen that a couple of times, but I'd
Yeah.
like to see that in like a fully restored version. And then the film that I wrote a paper on, which I think I still have, was a Claude Chabrol film who I got really into after his class. And the name of that I don't remember, but I'll look it up.
Uh-huh.
Because it wasn't a well-known film of his.
That's
And
great.
so I totally dissected it in terms of like, what the colors were meaning and all this stuff, which, people can arguably say is a load of shit in the sense of like it wasn't ever intended, but the way the teacher was presenting it was like, it doesn't matter. It still has, these things have an effect on the viewer.
Yeah.
That spoke to me about, ultimately the power of what we do for a living in terms of the end result, whatever part that you take in it, it all adds up to this storytelling.
Sure. It's amazing how I go back to the stuff I learned in school and how that stuff just circles back. I did an independent study on Akira Kurosawa, which I sort of designed myself because I just didn't like what they were offering. And I don't remember who the professor was, but I had some advisor. And it was just amazing because I just go and watch these Akira Kurosawa movies. And I remember him saying, I'm assuming you're a Star Wars fan. And I said, yeah. And he said, go watch The Hidden Fortress and then talk to me. And I was like, oh my God.
It's so funny. For my birthday 3 days ago, I watched Yojimbo.
Oh God, Yojimbo's fantastic. Yeah.
I did
And
opening shot of that movie is just anyway.
Well, and like you look at Akira Kurosawa's actually have some things on the website on the op where it's like just about his blocking, and his blocking was the way he knew where to put the camera was just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
It's like nothing else. Yeah, that's amazing. But that's great, and it's so. Do you find that as a camera operator, sometimes you'll like be setting something up and you'll sort of harken back to those things that you learned back then? Like, does it inform you at all?
I mean, it informs me because they made indelible impressions in my my soul, and my creative soul is the way I look at it. I don't, I feel that when I work, it's all very. I tend to just completely rely on my not the spontaneity or just in what feels right.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes things will remind me of something, but more often than not, I just kind of have this feeling that it's all in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'm drawing from it, even if kind of invisibly.
Yeah. I'll set something up every once in a while and I'll go, this reminds me of something. And I'm thinking it back through like, is this Rashomon or is this something other? And then I realize it's actually like, Chucky 3 in 3D or something like that.
Exactly, sure.
Just get completely disgusted with myself. But that's great. I mean, it's so cool to have. I mean, clearly, like you had an early love for this, so it all just sort of seeps in, right? And,
yes.
Over time. So did you go to SUNY Purchase and like the full 4-year kind of degree thing?
I went for 1 year, and that's where my story got disjointed because I went for 1 year, and then in the before the next semester, my sister, who was
I see. Yeah.
was at Columbia, screenwriting program headed up by Michael Hausman said, "Hey, Michael's gearing up for this movie. Do you want to meet with him? Because he's looking for PAs." And I said, "Yeah." And I met with him, and he said, "I'm going to give you a job." And so I said, "I can go back to school, or I can work on a like a Hollywood movie." And I
Yeah.
said that was a no-brainer for me. So that ended my career at school. And I reflect upon it a lot. It was a great year, and I met a lot of great people, and I'm still in touch with a couple of them. Um, so it was all good news. My only
And
regrets,
what movie was that you ended up working on?
it's called Desert Bloom, and
Okay.
it was the first film made by Sundance.
Ah,
It was something that the Sundance had been um, working as a workshop at Bob Redford's place in Utah, and it was called Sundance. But it was just a workshop that was kind of like this. Everybody wanted to be involved with that workshop. It was a time when it would drew on a pretty hefty crowd from Hollywood, writers and directors, and but it hadn't branched out into like
what it is
maybe
now.
they would put together scenes and videotape them.
Yeah.
But but Eugene Core, who was the director of the film, and I think some other, anyway, however it all came together, and Redford liked this project, and so Michael was totally in that world. He knew those people very well, and the package was put together, and it was the still the days when you just made films on location.
Yeah.
So, and Michael is one of his incredible abilities is that he just knows how to save money on location because he knows where you can like draw on local things that will save you money. But other things they would do is one of the reasons he hired me. He just finished a film, I think he just called 1918 in I think Louisiana and or Georgia, and he had hired a PA to be the period car person, and then made a deal with the Teamsters to allow it to happen, which they did reluctantly, but he made the deal, and that's the kind of
Yeah.
guy he was.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the job I got. I was the period car coordinator on this
Wow.
1952 set in the deserts in Arizona in a small town. And I had 6 weeks of prep, and I went to Tucson, Arizona, and I went to car shows and put ads in magazines and amassed, a whole inventory of people, quirky, weird old people with
Yeah.
absolutely gorgeous, pristine vintage cars. And we bought a few junkers and painted them in Earl Scheib, which was there
Earl
was an Earl
Scheib.
Scheib in South Tucson.
I'll paint any car for $99.99 or whatever it
Exactly. And
was.
I had those, and I had a keychain with a bunch of keys on it. And I was a set PA, but whenever cars were involved, that was my deal.
That's why. Wait, just out of curiosity, did you grow up in New York City or did you grow
Yeah,
up
New
outside?
York and New Jersey. Yeah.
So he couldn't find someone better than a kid who grew up in New York City to deal with the cars because it's not like you're driving all the
The
time,
way he
right?
looked at it was like, you're smart, you're
Yeah, you'll
young,
figure it out.
you're ready to go.
How great.
I'll give you the job. And it was like, I would operate e-fans, I would do lockups, I
Yeah.
would, yada yada yada. So,
Yeah.
but in the course of the film, which was still one of the best jobs I've ever had because it was just fun. Michael knew that I wanted to be in camera, and the camera department. It was Ray Villalobos was the cinematographer,
Oh,
and
wow. Yeah.
James Bagdonis was the first, and Tom
Uh,
Knoll was the second.
uh-huh.
And
And
Michael,
was Ray operating?
Steve Bridge. Steve
Steve
Bridge was the
Bridge.
operator.
Okay. Yeah.
And Michael let them know that I was interested in being in the department, and Tom Knoll, I would be indebted, forever. I shadowed him for the entire last week of production.
Ah, how
He
cool.
showed me. I loaded and I clapped, and for a full week on a film, and it was like, you're ready to do it. You can go out and you can call yourself,
A
a
loader.
loader or a
Yeah.
second assistant if you want. And I was
Oh,
like,
that's so great.
so it was an amazing, it was wonderful, and it was very meant a lot to me. And then Michael, and again, because this was the time when films were being made on location, I basically stayed with Michael. It feels like for 5 years, just moving from location to location. I didn't really have a permanent home. I kind of, had stuff.
Always as a PA and or a
No, I went
specific
straight
PA?
into the camera department. I mean,
He
I mean,
pulled you into. That's
yeah,
great.
the next one we did was called The Spruce Goose. It was a
Okay.
film by its Polish director named Lech Majewski, and the cinematographer was also Polish. And boy, why am I blanking on his name? He moved back to Poland about 6 or 7 years ago, but he had a run in Hollywood.
Mhm.
Jerzy Zielinski.
Oh, wow. That's
So
yeah.
and this was a $1 million movie shot in Pittsburgh, and there wasn't Jerzy wasn't convinced about hiring. I think Jerzy was a little bit like, no, I'm not sure about bringing somebody like this.
Yeah.
He brought a first over from Poland that I remember showed up, and all he had, his entire set bag was in a paper bag. He had this little like a kind of dirty, oily wax paper bag that had his tape measure and like a stipple pencil in it, and
Wow.
it was like, and
That's
he
an
was
old school focus
it was
puller
just
right there.
it was him, and then he hired George Moradian.
Oh,
George was on that. I'm trying to remember what George did. I think George operated,
okay. I worked with George as a DP years ago, but yeah.
and I was a grip. But very soon, again, I befriended Jerzy really quickly,
Yeah.
and I think I'm a little muddy here. I think that I wound up doing half the job in the camera department, or at
Yeah.
least the end of it, because that's the truth. But I
Yeah.
remember
At some
I,
point, they folded you in.
yeah,
That's great.
it was a non. I don't know if it was. Not
It
sure.
must have been non-union, right?
I actually don't know.
Or they were on location and just sort of.
I'm not sure. It was a very, because like I said, it was $1 million movie.
All right. I don't want to talk about it more. I don't want to get you in trouble after all these years.
Exactly.
They're going to come after you.
And
But
so that hooked me up with Jerzy, and then I did wind up doing a couple more jobs with Jerzy, and George Meridian and I were Jerzy, anyway, and that just kept going, and then we got hooked. George and I did a couple of jobs with again with Michael Hausman with David Mamet's first films,
oh wow.
and with a new cameraman Juan Anchia, and I became close with Juan, and so I stayed with him for several projects, and that it was kind of like that just kept going, and that took me all through my seconding, and by the time I finished with Juan, I was just kind of starting to transition to be a first, or wanting to be a first,
Mm-hmm.
and a good friend of mine, Ellen Freund, who's a set decorator. She said, "I really want you to meet this cameraman. He's doing this project," and we had both read the book, Shoeless Joe, and he's making the film for that book. And I was like, "You're kidding me!" He says, "I
Yeah.
got to meet this guy." And I remember I went out to some TV movie in Pasadena, and she brought me out, and John Lindley was up on a scaffolding doing like a shot of the house at night, and we like introduced each other like and I think that was it. I think I just said hi,
Yeah.
nice to meet you, and Ellen was like, you should hire this guy, and that was it. And then he didn't, as you know from previous podcasts, Doc Harmon did that job, and it was not time for me.
Yeah.
But shortly thereafter, Sneakers came along, and then and Doc was moving up, and I know John. It wasn't like I must have done something with him before, because he's not the kind of guy that just hired me to do that job, having not worked with me.
Yeah.
But it was
so maybe you did a commercial or something like that or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
had to have been. But that's how I got him with John.
Yeah.
and
So
that
the first
was
thing you did with John was sneakers,
yes, I believe so,
or you think, yeah, as a focus puller.
as a focus puller.
As a
Yeah.
focus puller. So for anybody listening, this is the point where you can skip ahead because I'm going to talk about how amazing sneakers is, which is probably the fifth or sixth time I've talked about. It's just the best. I'm so jazzed when I meet people who work on that movie because it's such a fantastic film. Was that a great experience working on that?
It was a totally great experience. But it's so funny listening to the both John's and Doc's podcast
Recollections of it.
recollections
Yeah.
because as an assistant, I don't remember any of the stuff they talked about in the sense of like it always I don't think about it. It wasn't on my radar. Um,
Yeah.
what I remember was being just feeling like this was such a special place to be working with that cast and having that opportunity was felt special and also just because Phil Alden Robinson has I've done 3 films with Phil and he's one of the greatest directors I've ever worked with
He's
and
phenomenal. What other movies did you do with him?
I did Some of All Fears and we did a HBO a TV movie thing called hmm, oh boy Freedom Song
Oh, okay. I
with Danny
vaguely
Glover.
remember.
It
I
was
don't know
a
that I ever
really,
saw
really
that.
great
Yeah.
project. It was, it was about the student
Uh-huh.
nonviolent coordinating committee (SNCC)
Yeah.
and the the Freedom Riders, and it was really cool. It was actually really.
He's such a smart director. It's
He's
really
such a smart director.
unbelievable.
I love him, and wish and hope and pray that there might still be a project
Another one out
one
there.
day
I
out
know.
there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
But let me ask you a question about you jumping up to firsting. I mean, it's really the first feature you're firsting on, and it's. I mean, even though, I mean, it's you like you said, you look at that cast, and it's Ben Kingsley and Robert Redford. I mean, these are movie stars, right? So, how do you approach? Because I'm asking for people who are moving up now. Like, how do you approach getting thrown into a situation where you're like, these are the people I grew up watching? I mean, do you treat them like everybody else? Are you afraid to talk to them? Are you afraid to ask them for help? I mean, how do you? What's the mental game?
what comes up for me right now is when I hear you ask that question is that I feel like there is so much kind of import put on that creates like a division between below the line and above the line, or between camera and the first team
Yep.
now
Yeah.
that didn't exist then.
Yeah. So it was.
No,
That's what I was wondering because
like
I vaguely remember that as well, but I also wasn't working at that time with people on that level. I mean,
I
that's
mean,
like out of the stratosphere kind of
yeah,
people.
I don't think I mean, everybody. I mean, working with Redford, it was everybody knows the stories about it. Basically, the struggle was just getting him to the set. He was
I've heard this.
he was in editor. He was cutting a river runs through it on the same
Yeah,
lot, and like
yeah.
he would go to the bungalow, and that's it. Like he
But
would,
but that said, at least that's a situation where you can go. It's not like It's not like he doesn't want to come because he's at the pool.
right, exactly,
Yeah,
and also like that, But on set, I don't, everybody was approachable and friendly,
that's great.
and like I said, there was just but I think it's funny how that is changed a lot now. Like I feel like it's not. So I think it's more difficult because as many people have spoken about, the camera operator. What we remember is that it used to be the first assistant would be sitting next to the camera operator. The second assistant would probably be in the room. So there's like 3 or 4 people that at the moment of taking a shot, assuming you're in a relatively small space in a room in a home or something like that. There's only so many people that need to be in the room,
Yeah,
and but there was more than one, and now there's just one, and that's me.
yeah.
It's like you're just alone in a room often,
No, you're talking present day. Yeah, yeah.
present
It's you
day,
and it's you and the dolly grip behind you, assuming they're on the dolly or whatever.
and
And
yet there's the need for. I mean, I think it came up in the previous podcast. You were talking about. I'm going to jump back and just like there was a story that I used to be a roommate with Joel Schrack, who's a boom operator. He's now a sound mixer,
mhm.
um, and he was working on the film. Like it was a thing with Antonio Banderas, and it was oh,
Antonio.
Antonio Banderas,
Yeah.
and he it was one of the first films that they had video taps on, where they were
Okay.
using monitors and the director was in a different room,
Yeah.
and the actors were like, "What the fuck's going on?" Because it was like, I
Yeah.
the director was often sitting on an Apple box. And like I said, so if the first assistant was on one side, the director would be on the other side sitting in an Apple box,
Right
right,
next to the camera, right?
his
Just
head next to the map box,
yeah.
or behind it, or in a chair, but close by, making eye contact, so that in between takes, there was some way for the actor to communicate without even saying anything about it. How am I doing? What's going on? What do you
Yeah.
need?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's all just kind of non-existent, or it
No.
falls on me. And sometimes that's okay, because if you're working with first team that's that's willing to, but getting back to what I was starting with, is I feel like there's just this emptiness, and it feels a lot less
Yeah.
comfortable.
Do you feel a responsibility nowadays to sort of fill that void when sometimes, because sometimes like we'll cut, right? And then it's just silence, and you can feel the actor is sort of going, well, is someone gonna, like, what are we
Something is,
doing, or
yeah,
whatever. Do you feel a need to jump in there and sort of like bring the humanity back, or do you
yeah,
be
for sure,
quiet, or yeah,
absolutely. It's because I feel bad. I mean,
yeah,
not because, it's like, if the actor who's doing this job, which everybody, as much as you want to downplay what they do, it's like standing in front of camera, like emoting or trying to be funny. It's like it's such a hard thing to do, just from
it feels like the most horrible thing to have to do for
right,
me, which is
right,
clearly why I don't do it on many levels.
right,
But yeah, and to not have that feedback, I
yeah,
always feel like they're on an island going, is anybody listening to me?
exactly.
But
So
let me. So since we're bringing it up, what do you do? What do you do? Because I'm sure this has happened where they finish and there's quiet, and then they look at you and go, "Hey, how was that for you? Did that work for you? Was that good? Did that work?" And they're looking for your feedback on their performance,
I
which is a
usually,
trick.
my gut impulse is always to be positive and supportive. You know,
Yeah,
um, if there's something that really, I mean, I unless I knew them personally, I probably would never say anything that would be you know considered about their performance. You know what I
yeah,
mean? I just feel like that's not in my tool chest. If I want to kind of break the ice or just continue the conversation, I might, if there was something that technically that happened, like if they were doing something that was kind of disruptive to the frame, or there's an object in the frame that I wanted to move, and then kind of, do you mind if I move these pencils over? Something that might break the ice a little bit and enable the conversation to continue if they wanted it to.
yeah.
Because I
No,
still
that's
feel
good.
like that
Yeah.
we all get together and you put together this world and you light this world and you set up the camera for this world. But at that moment, it's really about them. And the
Yep.
actor they need to be as comfortable, and they need whatever they need, as hard as it can be. If somebody's working a methodology that maybe isn't very popular,
Yeah.
or they're just not nice, you still say, this is the nature of our business. It's nothing new. It's been going on. There's a hundred and some odd years of stories of horrific things happening on movie sets, and but your choice is to be there and support it as best you can.
No, I like that, because there's that thing of, I always struggle with, as a human being. I want to go, oh, I really like that, or I was, or maybe it didn't, or whatever. But I also don't want to get into that headspace where then the director comes in and they're like, well, it worked, So I do like the idea of sort of, I don't know if deflecting is the right word, but giving them something, like you said, like, it was great, it really worked for me, and I'm not sure, but the pencils here, I noticed that you knocked those. Would it be a problem for me to move them, or whatever it is? But
Right.
I
Yeah.
like that idea. You may have heard, or maybe you didn't. I This kind of changed things for me, actually. Um, I interviewed Tommy Shalami, who's a great director that I've worked with, and I asked him about working with tough actors, which happens. But by the way, just for any actors listening, there are tough boom operators and tough camera operators and tough DPs. I mean, people are people. But he said something really interesting to me. He said, whenever I have an actor who's really tough and speaking out and being obnoxious or whatever, he said that's someone who's extremely frightened of what they have to do. And they may be that may be their whole life. Maybe they're always that way. But he said, so I look at them through that lens, and I thought that's a really interesting. It's a really and it sort of changed the way that I view those things. Is like, oh, you're not a horrible person. You're just like you're lashing out because you're completely uncomfortable. Because I mean, I would be.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
So I view it as more now like, what can I do to make, if there's anything, and then the least I can do is go, well, I'm not going to take this personally. This isn't about me. This is about you. And I hope, we find a way to make it work. But have you worked with actors that have just been, and you don't have to name names, but that just, you get on and by day 2, you're like, okay, this is going to be a very tough situation that we're in. And it's probably not going to get better.
I feel like I mean, not really. In the sense of I just feel like I'm so used to seeing such a um, such a display of insanity. It's like and for better or for worse, whether it's kind of fun, quirky insanity, or whether it's like um, just arrogance,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
or self-righteousness, things that wouldn't necessarily, like, I don't want to have dinner with the person.
Yeah. Yeah.
But boy, they're kind of killing it in this role. So, and I'm kind of cool that I get to photograph it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that's where you got to go, because it's so easy. I feel in this business, I feel like I still see it all the time, which is just like, just to, bemoan the difficulties of what we do. And it's been the same, for my entire career. It's not,
Yeah.
I think it's atrophied, and it's changed a lot. The marketplace has changed dramatically, and I feel like it's harder to find a truly creative environment these days to work in. But those are actually kind of almost nuances, in the sense of we're still doing the same thing, making product.
Yeah.
And you can either choose to be in a positive attitude about it or not. Now, and it's not like I've gone to that place, and I think more so as an assistant, where focus pulling is so hard, and it's like everybody, the unsung hero. It's like nobody wants to hear about it if it's sharp. It's like, oh, everybody wants to talk about it if you're having a problem. Whatever it is. And it used to be the whole thing about you didn't know till the next day, and dailies, and all of a sudden showing up to work the next day, and having the DP like kind of like give you the finger and say, come over, I need to talk to you. It's like you knew what was going on. You just didn't know whether you were going to lose your job or not. It's like,
and chances are you probably, if you're good, you probably knew it was coming anyway, because you were worried about something.
Exactly. And it's like, the times, oh my gosh, it makes my heart skip a beat to think about the times that things happen,
Yeah. Yeah.
rollouts on huge stunts that could have been.
It's so funny. I'd kind of forgotten about rollouts. Like,
like who would say what?
I won't even say, but there's one actually specific rollout that just to this day, and it wasn't my fault. I was the operator, but it's just like there's an actor who's just hitting it, and then you hear shoo, 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 and you just want to die. And it's just, and you're so embarrassed. Oh, that was the worst.
Now, to me, the worst thing is I have this conversation every job I've been on, for more than a couple of days, that the camera not getting turned on, and people like say, "Oh, come on, what are you talking about?" I said, "No, I'm talking about on every single job, more than a day or two that I've done in the digital world, we have had at least one take where the camera doesn't get turned on."
And people listening to this may be shocked by that,
It's
but
astounding.
the thing is, just because people, it's funny. I take for granted what people know, and I realize what I was talking about was there was film in the mag, and it was the first assistant's and maybe the second assistant's job to keep track of the fact that there was enough in there. And sometimes like the director would start over, go, hey, just take it from the top. And someone would have to say like,
Yeah.
hey, just so you know, we're not going to make it through this.
Only got 2 minutes on the mag, sir.
But then there were times where people just screwed up the timing, and you were doing some great shot, and the film would run out. But then the other thing was that when you used to first of all, you and I used to turn the camera on, so we were responsible. My big thing was I would forget to turn it off which wasn't as bad as not turning it on. But then there'd be you'd feel something and you'd hear something and you'd know the film was rolling. So, and now it's like at best it's a little like red light or green light or something like that. And there are times where afterwards it's like, wait a minute, did we roll on that? Like, I thought and you and I aren't rolling anymore. Someone else is rolling. So, it seems so simplistic, but it's actually good for me to hear that it happens to you too. Like, cause I think it happens to everybody. It
definitely happens to everybody.
Because the thing is, when you're getting ready to roll, you're like going, okay, what's my checklist? And that light is out. I got to watch for that boom. And you're not looking for that teeny little light, even though that's the most important thing at that point. It's weird. Yep. It's very strange.
Yep.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually. But going back to sneakers, I have to ask you one question. So you were sitting next to the camera. You're connected to the camera, and Doc's got his eye in the eyepiece. Were there times with that cast where you're watching it and you just like you have to pinch yourself because you're getting to watch these unbelievable performers just chew up a scene? I mean,
I think so. I mean, I think that again, maybe more so in retrospect, in the sense of like, because pulling focus is extraordinarily focused.
Sure.
And working with John, it was like I remember we were doing like a day exterior where maybe focus pulling wasn't that big of a deal, but we were in the course of the shot, we were running basically the full gamut of the Panavision 4:1 zoom lens. I was pulling the stop.
Okay.
And rotating a graduated filter in the matte box.
That sounds like a John Lindley shot right there. Yeah.
And it was like, and he's probably, riding the dolly with like a flag and like, it's kind of like chaos behind camera, but
Yeah.
So
maybe it's easier to get lost in the scene as an operator and something like that than it is.
But I mean, like the moments when everybody, there's a great pullback where they transition from day to night. And
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
We had to build a rig for Sidney. At the end of the shot, it just reveals Sidney Poitier in profile, and the gun comes up in the frame.
Yep.
And it was one of those things where he had to be where the camera was. So they built they put him on a dolly sideways
and rolled him in
and really quickly, like, and it was like.
And it's seamless. I know the shot you're talking about. It's great. It's just so great.
The coolest thing we've ever done.
I'm gonna do my PSA that I always do when we talk about sneakers. There are people who are listening to this who have not seen Sneakers because it is not as big of a movie as it should be. Go watch Sneakers. It's so good.
It's a very fun movie, and I realized, it's age appropriate. I can show it's like we're always looking for films that we can see together as a family. And
sure, yeah. No, there's nothing. There's no problems with it. And also, as I always say when we talk about it, I think the single best ending to a movie ever. The tag on that movie, the last little thing with the news clip, is just so unbelievably perfect. It's great.
I think the one thing I was going to say about Sneakers, which would be totally different from like what John and Doc would say, is that what I remember, one of the things that was so hilarious was when shortly moving into the stage at Universal, it was the stage that they'd done the Phantom of the Opera on.
Oh, and when they like the original back in the day, yeah.
And it's got a placard on it, and it's like when they redid the stage, there's a whole history to this particular stage. They left some of the original set pieces because they were kind of built into the walls.
Oh wow!
Like they were like permanent, and shortly, they'd been building, the Sneakers lair was on this stage. It was this huge, looks like loft apartment in San Francisco. So they'd been building and pre-rigging this thing forever. And the grips had discovered, the rigging grips had discovered that there was like the secret rooms you could get into.
Yeah.
And they were like hidden away. And, so we had a secret room that you had to like crouch down and crawl to get into. And once you got into it, it was big enough to hold like 7 or 8 people sitting. You couldn't stand up in it.
Uh-huh.
And we would go in there and hang out. And like at one point, I built like I took a bust of Elvis Presley. We had a bust that was on, and we put it on a rock. There was a shelf that went around the room, and we put it up on the shelf so that Elvis was always greeting you when you crawled in. But then we went one step further, and we did monofilament from the bust around the perimeter so that somebody could be sitting, if they were alone in the room, they could be sitting at the entranceway. And when somebody stuck their head in, you could make Elvis's head turn like the trout and like look at you like and like look away and look at you.
This is a classic example of the stupid crap that we all do when we have time on our hands.
So here's the secret room, and we would go in there and
Yeah.
do God knows what. So Ricky Jay, who I'd become good friends with on all the Mammoth work, had a company to teach, sleight of hand things and magical things for theater and film. And he had gotten a lot of notoriety because he'd done the Angels in America had on Broadway had this something that nobody understood how they did it, and he was designed the apparatus for that piece. So he had a company actually for doing this. Robert Redford needed to do a trick, a card trick or a sleight of hand trick. I can't remember even what it is, but it's in the film. And so Ricky was hired, and he came to set one day, and it was like, okay, blah blah blah. I need a place that's like, I'm gonna be telling Bob something that like nobody, like laymen can't know.
Oh, I see where this is
People
going.
aren't allowed to know this. This is just a magician's lore thing.
Yeah.
And so I need a place that's totally private. And I was like, I know where to go.
I gotta go clear it out first, but I'll be back in a minute.
Ricky Jay and Bob Redford crawled into the little secret place. And
I love it.
I went in there and hoping that and Ricky was like, sorry, Henry.
Yeah.
As much as I appreciate you, you're going to have to leave. And
that's great. Oh, what a great story. That's really great.
But that's the kind of stuff I remember from Sneakers.
That makes perfect sense. What a great thing. So before we move on to operating, because I want to hear you transfer, you worked on Tremors as a first assistant.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first thing I ever worked on. I worked for Forward Productions, and we did all the visual effects, the miniature visual effects of the graboids and whatever. Are you enjoying the fact that you worked on something that was just a fun B movie that's become like this cult classic of epic purport? I mean, like that movie has taken on a life of its own. It's
absolutely. I wound up following the Facebook Tremors, group, and it's like
it's a
every
rabid group of people. I mean, I get contacted about coming to speak, and I'm like, I was a PA on the visual effects. Yeah, I mean, they're rabid. It's amazing. It was a great movie. It's actually a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun, and that was actually very good. It was a very positive experience. We made the whole thing except for a couple of days in Lone Pine.
Yep.
And I remember. And speaking of visual effects, because it was like back, I remember some of those plate shots we had to do back in those days where you had to we had to build a scaffolding and like triangulate, with like, built, things that were like, pounded into the ground to stabilize, the
stabilize
the camera just for a lock off.
Yeah. Well, and I remember the information would come into us, and it was like we had these compasses and this and that to make sure the camera was exact. We had this old Mitchell that I would help load and whatever, because I was the PA who did everything, and that it was matching the thing. And I remember thinking like, why is this so like I didn't understand how specific it was because I didn't know anything. But it's a cool thing to be a part of. Actually, again, anybody listening, if you haven't seen Tremors, check it out. I think the guys who wrote it, Brant Maddox and S.S. Wilson.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes.
They wrote the Wile E. Coyote cartoons, is what I was told.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
And that's why this movie has. I mean, when you hear that, you go, "Oh yeah, now I get it." That's their sense of humor.
No, that was good. And that the cast. Speaking of great cast, I mean, Kevin Bacon is like, we became friendly. I mean, it was like he was a guy that
totally cool guy.
He wouldn't hesitate to like say, "You want to come over on Sunday or whatever." It's like
yep.
Which makes those environments even, takes it to the next level where you just feel like there is no differentiation between any of us. We're all here making this movie. have a fun time. It's
Yep. That's
interesting.
great.
Fun. Yeah.
That's
It was
well,
a
and I
great.
think that happens more when you're on location, like a location like that too. Because when
Yes,
you're in the middle of nowhere, it's sort of like, well, we'll all hang out together. What else
we
are
were
we gonna
all
do?
in some horrible, funky hotels, and filling up the whole town. And
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
it was every weekend there was some scary experiences at the bar, and it was like
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. It's
um,
I did a Western down in Lajitas, Texas, which is the middle of nowhere. Actually, the officially elected mayor is a goat named Cline Henry who drinks beer, and it was the same thing. And I remember David Carradine was in it, and he had this instead of staying with the crew, he had this like Gulfstream. What is the silver?
yeah,
Is it Gulfstream? Is that
Gulfstream,
what it is?
yeah, yeah,
That was probably his that they towed out to the middle of the desert, and he would hang out there, and he would go, "Hey guys, you want to come out and hang out?" And we went out there, and there was a guy who was teaching all of us how to play didgeridoo, and he would like burn them with these, and I bought one from him. It was wild, and it's
that's
just like
great.
again, you're
Yeah,
like you're David Carradine, like we're hanging out.
right. Kung
It's
Fu.
that's the cool part of this business. It definitely
Right.
is. And not that they're any better or any worse, but they have stories and interesting stuff. And yeah,
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
wild. So how'd you make the jump to operator? Like when did you, how long were you an assistant?
Well, interestingly enough, I mean, the cameraman I was working with was somebody that was pretty much outspokenly like not somebody that really liked to move people up very often, and believed he like thought of you in the category that you best service the project.
Yeah.
Um, and there were there were different schools, and you kind of some cameramen are like constantly throwing, oh yeah, let's put Henry on the C camera. He needs he
Yeah.
needs he needs practice. So it's kind of like I just say sayonara, and I'd been taking the gearhead home on the weekends and doing as
Okay.
much kind of
Yeah.
technical. But that part never really scared me anyway, because going back to my initiation period of wanting to be a camera operator, like that the mechanical part of it enthralled me, and I was always felt like that was going to come easy to me. I think that the and due to being inundated with cinema history by choice, I think has embedded in me a visual aesthetic that I can just rely upon. I don't think about it.
Yeah.
It's like I just can just impulsively feel like I know, where I want to put a camera to tell a
Hmm.
story, right? The thing I think that's the most difficult is the one that you've touched upon, which is that um, communicating with the actors, communicating with your dolly grip,
Yep.
communicating to the cameraman, communicating to the director in a way that that's gets the job done.
Well,
Isn't
and it's interesting you bring it up like that because there is that thing of like you need to communicate, but you don't want to over communicate, and you also don't want to under communicate.
Yeah, I find
And
as time goes on, my sentences get shorter and shorter. I
yep,
mean, sometimes if I go off on my own, I'll be like, Henry, just reel it in, dude. Yes or
shut
no,
up.
right?
But and I don't know if you found this when you first moved up, but I think there was everything was a large story, like everything, because you didn't want to leave anything out, and you wanted to make sure and whatever, and nobody has time for that. Everybody just
Right.
wants
Yeah,
succinct
got to move on to
information.
the next setup, right?
And then I
Six
think
pages
like
to shoot today. Let's cut the conversation. Okay.
cut to the chase. And there's also that thing of there's all that stuff that they just don't want to hear about. They just want you to fix.
Right.
And
Right.
it's learning what to fix and what to bring up and what not to fix.
Right.
So what was
So
the show that you moved up on?
so anyway, so what happened is I had some slow times. Probably I don't remember. I had some cameramen that I think I'd met a little bit, and so I was maybe doing a little, very little bit of extra cameras in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
TV shows and things like that. And then um, a cinematographer named Amy Vincent,
Sure.
who went to AFI
Yeah.
and did very well there, had been my assistant on multiple projects. She'd been the second assistant on many projects, and had remained close.
Including
Um,
Sneakers, right? It's her
no,
and, well,
no,
I thought she was on Sneakers. She and Brian Pitts were on Sneakers.
Lisa Guerra was on Seekers.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right.
Um, but but Amy and I did many other projects.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm right about that. I think I'm right about that.
I thought I saw a picture of her on Sneakers, but I may be wrong. It might
I
be
know.
been another movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah,
And Amy called me up because she'd gotten her kind of her big break, which was Eve's Bayou. And
sure. By the way, I was the Steadicam operator on the short of Eve's Bayou that Amy shot for the director's name was
Casey Lemons.
Casey Lemons, that then got sold to, or whatever you want to call it, to become the feature. Yeah,
Wow,
that's
that's
where I
cool.
met Amy. She was,
That's for
and I
you.
think it was an AFI project, maybe.
Very
Yeah,
likely. Very
yeah,
yes,
yep.
yes. Casey had done an AFI project, or she was also maybe involved in that. Like the Sundance thing. There were kind of these multiple, like kind of work group think tank,
Mm-hmm.
LA based, and one was called Chanticleer Films.
Chanticleer Films, who
Right.
used to, it was always like a big actor who was
Everybody
directing
wanted
for
to
the
work
first
on the
time.
Chanticleer Films, but you didn't get
Yep.
paid anything. But they were like
Nope.
these huge resume boosts.
Well, I did the thing. Richard Dreyfuss directed a short that I did with Stephen Poster that he shot. It was the first time I was ever on a camera, and Kathleen Turner directed that I did, and someone else. Yeah, yeah. That was that was an interesting gig. Yeah.
So Amy hired me, and we all went off to Louisiana and made Eve's Bayou, which again
Mm-hmm.
was it's a $1.7 million movie
Mm-hmm.
with Sam Jackson taking a good chunk of that. And it was amazing experience because the was just most loving, spirited, kind,
So
thoughtful
great.
director, and Amy was bursting with creativity, and it was very difficult because we were really pushing hard to make it
Yeah.
special. But and I, it was the same for me. I mean, I felt like it felt so amazing to be in this position and supported to make it as beautiful pictures as we could and still convey the story the way it wanted to be conveyed. I think they recently did a restoration on it, which now it
Yep.
has an anniversary.
Yeah.
It's a
She was actually,
pretty good looking
last I talked
movie.
to Amy, she was just, I think she was overseeing that or something. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that opened up her world to, regrettably, a lot of this was when there were not a lot of female cinematographers around,
Yeah. She was
directors of
early on.
photography. And
Yep.
so it wasn't like people were knocking down the doors to get to her. Um, but we did about 5 films in a row, and they're
Oh.
all very small, little, low budget films in Los Angeles. I
Mm-hmm.
think they all were.
Mm-hmm.
So I really got my chops down in the course of those.
Yeah. Do you remember was there a point where you sort of finally got to the point where you're like, I can get to set and do whatever they need me to do? Like,
Yeah, I'd say that's not. I think that's more recent rather
yeah.
than a long time ago because I still get nervous going to work.
Do
It's
you? Because
like,
I was going to ask you about that.
yeah,
I think most people do, but what?
I still feel like I don't know. Like, what if I'm not prepared?
Why are
What
they
if it's
calling me?
what if they're doing something that I have never done before? What if
Yeah.
it's like, what if it's if they're working in some weird way that I've only heard about but never done? And so far, it's not been the case. You kind of show up and say, "Oh yeah, okay, we're just going to set up a shot," and then it literally click into not automation as if like it's by rote, but
Yeah.
automation like I know what to do. I know what to do next to get to the point where I can say camera's ready. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. But yet you still get nervous at the beginning of your job. Is it just that you're nervous at the beginning of the job and then after a day or two you're like, oh, I don't have anything to be nervous, or
It
does
usually
it go
lasts
away?
not even that. It's just literally
Yeah.
like the first setup.
First shot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, this is all great. This is
Yeah.
everybody's here and we're being so those films, and then yeah, lo and behold, the friend of mine that I had worked with previously as an assistant um, brought me in to work on Pleasantville,
Mm-hmm.
um, and on the B camera. I
Yep.
didn't do all of it. Doc was on it, but he was having his first child, and so it was took 6 weeks off or something like that, and
Yeah,
it
you
was,
came
it's
in,
pretty long production.
and that
And
was
that
with
was
John Landman.
again,
Yeah.
an amazing, because that was a real. I mean, John should have won an Academy Award for that project. It's just an incredibly beautiful film,
I don't
and it was
disagree.
yeah,
Yeah, it's an overlooked film. It's really what
yeah.
they did in there was for the time. Now you sort of look at it and you're like, but I mean, it's still beautiful, but it's not as impressive as what
But it's
you
also
guys
like the
pulled off.
story and the
Yeah,
and the acting. Oh
it's a
boy, the
great
acting in
movie.
that movie is pretty stellar. So anyway, so that was I got that was great, and then I was back in John's camp, and we continued on to some other projects.
Yeah,
But that kind of really snowballed things up into kind of bigger projects, and meeting cameramen, that I'd worked with. Bill Pope would be another one that I'd done a lot of work with. I hadn't mentioned him before, but we did a lot of work on videos and commercials, and then wound up working with him a bunch in
yeah. I was going to ask you about Team America World Police because there aren't a lot of people who work on something like that with the puppets and whatever. Was that as an operator? I mean, is it a different vocabulary than you're used to because of the puppets, or
everything was
is it
different about Team America, and it's to this day it's the hardest job I ever did, for
really?
many
How so?
for many reasons, many very disparate reasons.
Yeah.
Um, the most basic one was that we they hired Trey, Matt and Trey had, like, they wanted to just do the job like as an animated feature. Like, they didn't care. They don't care anything about the visuals, right? All
It's
they
just
want
the
to do is tell,
story and the
they
comedy.
just want to tell the
Yeah.
jokes, right?
Yeah.
And they don't
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to wait, right? And they met with Bill, and Bill instantly was saying, like, talking like, what if we go widescreen? What if we and they were like, really? We could do that with this, it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so it blossomed into what it became, which was like to treat it like this epic,
Yeah.
action adventure with puppets.
Which, in the long run, by the way, is a great idea because that's part of why it works so well. I
Absolutely,
think. Yeah.
absolutely. I
It
mean,
was
I was
dead
a
on.
huge fan of Jerry Anderson and Thunderbirds, and Fireball XL5 was my personal favorite.
Uh huh.
But to me, that was like, this is so
Yeah.
freaking awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But so we would come in and just figure, the whole film was made on some warehouses in Culver City, and
Uh-huh.
they'd built like 7 or 8. All the sets were built in like one warehouse because they all were
Yeah. Sure.
small-ish, right?
Yeah.
But they had 7 or 8 or 10 sets in one place. At one point, we had 5 Technicranes on that stage. 5 Technicranes. I wish
Oh
I had
my,
a picture of it.
one for each set, basically, or
Yeah,
something
one for
like
each
that.
set,
Yeah.
because later in the job, like, I shot all the aerial stuff, right? So that was my unit, right? Um, Rob Sweeney had his unit. Chris Duskin had, we had 5 units going simultaneously, and nobody's recording sound, so you can make as much noise as you want.
Sure.
So there'd be explosions going off, and it was chaos, right?
Chaos. It sounds like
It
chaos.
was
Yeah.
chaos.
Yeah.
So that was one aspect of it being very, very different. But the thing I was going to say was that when you figured out what the shot was, then the next thing that happened is the puppeteers, of which there were many, would tell the cameraman, tell Bill, what they needed in order. Like, only so many puppets could be, maneuvered, in terms of, like, if they needed to walk, there was only a limited number that could do that, and how many of them were going to see, like, mouths move, and that was another number, and some that could just be
Wow.
kind of in the background doing nothing. So that all had to be figured out. Now, the ones that needed to move had to be puppeteered from either above or below.
Sure.
If it was above, it was with a condor. So sometimes we had multiple condor. These sets were not that big.
No.
Multiple condor buckets coming in
You'd
overhead
be running out of room, basically, right? I mean,
completely, and then cutting holes in the floor because all the stages would have to be elevated enough
yeah.
so the puppeteers could get underneath. Cut a hole in the floor, in the position that they needed to be, right? And then you'd say, okay, well, how long is it going to take? Well, 3 or 4 hours,
That's what I was going to ask next. Is none of this is fast? I mean,
3 or 4 hours.
yeah, yeah.
So the entire camera department, we had a camera room where we would go DP the entire and watch feature-length films from head credits to tail credits. With that, and you get on the radio and say, I mean, does anybody need it? No, we don't need you yet.
Because at that point, it's just the puppeteers and construction and whatever, figuring out how to make the puppets act.
How to do the shot mechanically, right?
Wow.
So that was just hard mentally and emotionally because and then you'd go in and you'd be in like some really awkward, cramped environments. We worked a lot off techno cranes in order to avoid being on set, but obviously not always. And I think the other part that was just noticeably different. Greg Lunsell was the first assistant, and he has a famous story about he had to take a couple of days off, and had somebody come in for him, and the gentleman that came in at lunch was shaking. His hands were shaking. And he got on the phone and called Greg and said, "What the fuck did you get me into?"
Oh,
and it
God.
was like, the reality was that a 19-inch tall puppet at 50 mils at minimum focus had a depth of field of about
nothing.
That
Yeah.
And we always were on the sliders, right? Doing these little push-ins, right?
Oh my God.
And the puppets, even if they were standing still, they'd be wavering back and forth. So
this is what as you're saying it, this is what I'm thinking of, is if you're looking at an actor, you and I both know there are tells that you get used to. And
right.
But there's nothing with a puppet.
All of a sudden it would just like lean forward. And since we're not recording sound, like Greg he's screaming like, get back on your mark. And the guy would be like, I am on my mark. He says, no, the head is 6 inches over the mark, I
was just going to say, and from above or below, you can't really tell. Oh my God.
Extraordinarily difficult focus pulling, which just results in everybody having it was difficult.
Sure.
Just really difficult filmmaking. And we laughed till our guts, split.
That was my next question. You just, I mean, the ad-libbing must have been ridiculous. I mean, are Trey and Matt, actually, I know it's not what you use, but they're doing dialogue?
They built this thing they called it the Gildefluke, right? And it was Trey had a headset on and a microphone, and whatever came out of his mouth, the puppet's jaw would go pop, 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 and in kind of in coordination.
Oh, it was synced. It was like electronically synced up.
It was
somehow.
electronically synced. So he would sit there and he would, since they're not recording sound, he would be reading the dialogue. Okay. Watching the monitor, and the puppet would going bop, 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 bop. But it would do it. The puppet would go bop, 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 no matter what he said. So he would just go on, and we would do full rolls of him ad-libbing of stuff that you didn't know was coming. That would just knock your socks off. It was
I can't imagine.
And you're just sitting there trying to hold it together, not shake the camera, and
Yeah. That's great. I mean, it sounds like it was impossible, but it also sounds like it was just a laugh riot.
Oh, it was great.
My thing that I like to share about that is I remember very, very specifically that I was on ER and Clooney came in and he goes, "You guys got to see this. You got to." And I don't know whether we brought a VCR in or we went to his trailer or whatever. We're like, "What?" And he goes, "I just got this Christmas card sent to me, and it's a video cassette, and it's this animated thing of Jesus Christ and Santa Claus fighting each other." And we're like, "What?" And he goes, "No, I can't even describe it. It's the craziest thing you'll ever see. You're gonna pee your pants." And I remember all of us sitting around and watching it. We're like, "What is this?" And he goes, "I don't know, but it's these two guys, because that's how they sent out this Christmas card to everybody in the industry they could think of, and it started getting handed around." So I actually I don't know maybe the props guys or whatever, they had like, a dual VR thing. So we all duped it off and everybody brought it home to show other people. And I remember bringing it home and showing people, and they're like, it's like 6 generations down or whatever. But
That's amazing. That's
yeah,
hilarious.
because like, I mean, it's hard to think of now, but prior to them hitting the scene, there wasn't this kind of irreverential
Yes, right.
animation that existed on the level that it does now. So it was just so, yeah. So, Team America World Police, I remember when it came out, it was just like, okay, strap in. This is going to be crazy. And sure enough, it was. That's a wild thing to be a part of. And how long were you on that show for?
I don't remember, but it was a full, it's a full length shoot,
Yeah.
10
Yeah.
weeks or something like that.
Wow. There you go. So how long have you been operating at this point? I
I don't
mean,
know.
today, I'm saying, how long have you been since you
I
started
just have to go
operating?
back. Whatever that, I would use that Eve's Bayou as my
Yeah. What was that?
initiation
Not
date.
late 80s, maybe
Yeah.
mid 80s? Yeah, something like that. So basically, probably like 30 years, give or take, right?
Yeah, I think less for operating though, because I've been my my card says I've been in the union for 37, I think.
Oh, okay. So maybe 25 or whatever,
Yeah,
but
something.
enough time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you've been doing it for a while. So do the challenges have the challenges changed over the years as you progress as an operator? Like, are the things that you find hard now different than what they were back then?
I mean, part of it's just the trajectory of my career in the sense of like maybe I haven't been lucky enough to work with on the projects that care and want to take the time,
Yeah.
um, so that it's just about getting the work done, and it
Hmm.
feels more more like the factory.
Yeah.
Um, that's not new, I know, but I feel like often the case with the streaming product in the world today, and there are levels, there are there's graduations of how much it feels like just a push to just to 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 make the call sheet versus taking some time to do something that feels like it's, i.e., either good looking, but that not that that really matters. It's just telling the
Yeah.
story in a visual way, because all those films I watched when I was a kid, a lot of them don't have a lot of dialogue in them.
Yeah,
They're really kind
they
of
have a lot of
simple.
moments, which is I miss that a lot.
But they
Those
have
are great.
a lot of thoughtful composition.
Now,
Even
but
if
are you
it's
so are you saying when you get into the stuff where it's just making the call sheet, is the struggle then when not to push and when to let go and go, we
yeah,
could do
I
this
mean,
so much better, well, but we don't have the time, and so I'm just gonna sort
the
of
part about it that I like is I get to rely on my instincts 100%. That part of it I really like, because then I get to make my choices quickly and live with it, and and often feel like, yeah, that worked, and I'm so glad that I didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the best thing to do is. I just did what felt right, and it works. And so
yeah.
that I feel like is just has to do with having done it for long enough and having the confidence that I can do that. So that part of it I actually kind of enjoy, working quickly. I have nothing against working quickly. I don't want to say like everything needs to be, massaged to the point where it's painful. um, is that kind of,
No, I think
yeah.
no, that's all interesting. It's interesting that you bring up, because it's something that I don't talk about a lot with people is learning to trust your instincts. And I think
Mhm.
when you get to that point, it becomes a very different game, right? Because there's no question that being able to take time on something is great, because you can really think it and dissect it and what's the best way and how do we tell the story. But sometimes when you don't have that and you just have to rely on your instincts, you come up with something quickly in the heat of the moment that might be better than you ever could have if you spent 3 hours doing it, just because you're like, well, I know that this works, and oh, but in this situation, if I line those two things up, it's gonna absolutely tell the story that we're doing. So I think that's an incredible thing that comes only with time, right? Is you have to have succeeded enough, and by the way, failed enough to get to the point where you do trust your
I think
instincts.
it comes with time, and I think it comes with, again, schooling, education I can't downplay how. I mean, I think it's easier than ever to watch content now. So it's just like
Yeah.
to to deep dive, particularly you know cinema between the turn of the century and 1980. Like that portion of cinema history of just like there's just so much to be learned and but again, yes, it comes out just by doing it. You can only have so much inside your head before you have to actually do it. Taking stills helps a lot.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
because it's you and your camera, and you don't have to worry about the pressures of necessarily, unless you're doing something that's time sensitive, which sometimes can be fun too. Like that, we'll sometimes see a picture that I want to take, but it's only going to be available for a very short period of time. So you got to plan out how to take that picture, capture that
Yeah.
moment.
I think that's an overlooked part of this was as uh, and I often tell students when I'm talking to them is go out and take stills and really think about the frame, but don't take 30 and pick the best one. Take one and walk away because it,
Hmm.
it, it forces you to commit to something, right? Which I think is also a huge part of what we do is committing to frames and committing to landing frames and I think and also the weird part, another thing I don't talk is knowing what you can get away with.
Hmm.
And I don't
Yeah.
mean that in a
Well,
bad way, but
no, that's a great observation, and I think that is something that you really only learn from doing it. It's like
yeah,
you really start to understand like what's needed and not needed, and we haven't talked about the editorial process, which I think you know as much as the composition, editing is just so incredibly important and unique to our medium. It's like
yeah,
putting the shot against the shot, going back to the famous studies done by Pudovkin and Eisenstein about, putting a baby's face next to a bowl of soup, and all of a sudden the baby looks hungry. It's
yep,
like
yep.
that is key to get to doing good work, is understanding, how this frame is going to be used in context to the frame before and after or somewhere else in the movie.
So you're
So
thinking about the edit during the day while you're
I
working,
often I often do, yeah.
and
I
will
mean,
you?
I can say that like I don't know how it's actually going to be edited, but I mean, just in terms of like feeling like editorially, this is a good thing to do.
Yeah. Well, the way that I always look at it is I mean, I like the fact that you brought that up. Is it's not that I know that it's going to be edited this way. It's that I know
Right.
that at least it can be edited this way, and hopefully someone with time and everything is going to make it much better. But at least so you have all the pieces and they connect and whatever. But do you will you involve the DP and the director in that and go, hey, it seems like we've got this shot and this shot. Do we need some connective tissue here, or I mean, do you
So
bring that
yeah, I
up
mean,
or?
I think that whole conversation just gets into it's just the dynamic of what the chemistry is with the people that think through that process.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't want to hear from me, and sometimes they really want to hear from me,
Yeah.
and it's like, and sometimes I feel comfortable, knowing that my words or my thought will actually be accepted, not as a threat or not as an imposition, but actually in the sense of like, and sometimes even my thought or my idea can be accepted, but it's still like, yeah, I would. The answer is, I wish I had time to do that, to do it that way as well, but we
Hmm.
don't. I agree with you, and we should do that, but we can't.
Yeah,
and
because
then
I got to
and
make
that
my day, or
and that always
that
drives
sort of.
me bonkers because it frustrates me, that that's the reality. But it's this.
Yeah, yeah. Our mutual friend, Mr. Lindley, you may have heard of him say this before, is, at the end of the day, like an AD will go, "This is a great day. We got 73 setups or whatever," and he'll kind of lean into me and be like, "How many of them were good?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And it's not a numbers game. I mean, I know. Look, the reality is, people also have to make their day, and it's commerce, and there's a business aspect to this. But at the end of the day, it's about did we do good work?
yeah,
So if you're starting a job and this may not happen that often. It doesn't happen that often with me, but I'm actually about to go into this where you haven't worked with the DP and the director before. So obviously you've probably talked to the DP a fair amount, but hopefully before the show, so you get a feeling for them. But do you have a process for when you get to set of sort of figuring out, okay, who wants to hear from me, who doesn't want to hear from me, how much should I be involved? Like, Do you,
I find it's usually just observation. If you just observe
yeah.
and hang back, I
Yep.
don't interject yourself too quickly and kind of take in the vibe.
Hmm.
All of those questions will be answered pretty quickly.
So
And
basically
then
sit back and listen more than be proactive and
I find, I mean, I just last week I was on something and I'd never worked with a cameraman before, and I had just that feeling, and they were, and the job was being treated very carefully, single camera, 90% of the time,
hmm
operated by the DP. And so and I'd been told he's very, very methodical and very careful. So I felt almost obligated to try to touch base with them. But even in that case, I think he was like, more often than not, I find unless there's insecurity issues,
hmm
which are abundant in our business, the cameraman's like, well, that's your camera, and you should do with it as you seem fit. I mean, up to a point. I mean, here are the guidelines. I'll show you a frame that roughly is what I'm thinking. Um, and in the words of like Amy Vincent or even John Lindley, make it better.
make
Just
it
go ahead and
better.
just make
Yeah.
it better. Do what you need to do to make it better.
Yep.
Um, and then not, and I used to always assume I mean, on that job, nobody was looking at the monitors. Nobody was going back and looking at replay. So there was none of that anyway. So I just accepted that as like, okay, I hope that when he watches dailies, that he's not going to cringe at what I'm doing, but I'm trusting
Yeah.
that that's my insecurity,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I will gladly just kind of get over.
Well, and I think we all have that. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but I just sort of try to take that and push it in a box and close the lid and go, I can only do the best that I can do. And I'm going to
Yeah.
trust, like we were talking about trusting your instincts. I'm going to trust that the 30 some years I've been operating means something.
Right. Right.
But then there is the thing of, one person's perfect headroom is not another person's perfect headroom
Sure. I mean, it was like Sam Raimi and Bill Pope would fight constantly over what a close up, an anamorphic close up is, right? And Sam Raimi's here, and Bill Pope is here.
Yep.
He's like, he
Yep.
says nothing above the eyebrows you want to look at, So it's like, okay,
Pope is a very interesting person to work with. I really enjoy it, but it's one of the tougher. It's one of the tougher gigs.
he's 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 also such a good operator that when you're goofing up, I
Yep.
literally had him grab the camera out of my hands and just nail it on the first
Yep.
pass.
Yep.
I'm like,
Been there.
ooh,
Been there. Been there. What you were saying about the close up reminds me of. I did a movie that. Who's the guy who? He's a director now, but he wrote A Beautiful Mind, and he became a director. I can't think of his name, but it was like his second or third movie that he was directing, and I was doing second unit, and I was in a stable, and I don't remember who the actor was. Boy, I don't remember any of the details of this, but it might have been Jude Law or something like that. But anyway, he's outside, and he goes, "So start on a close up of the horse." And so I pull back, and I get nose to ears. And he goes, no, a close up of the horse. And I was like, okay. So I push into the eyes, and he goes, you can't just see the eyes, you got to see the mouth. And I look back, and I think he said, what's the problem? And I look back, and I go, I don't know what a close up of a horse is. Like what?
it's
And
a
I never thought
horse.
about it before. And I'm looking at the actor, and he's kind of like, oh, it was Colin Farrell. I was looking at Colin, and he kind of looked at me, and he shrugged. He's off camera, and I'm thinking, because I'm thinking maybe you know what a close up. So I pulled back a little wider to where you almost see it, and he goes, yeah, that's it. That's a close. And I'm like, I don't think this is a decided thing out there. But again, it's just like, I'm just going to keep showing you stuff till you're happy. And then, okay, this is great.
Right.
This is what it is. And,
Mhm.
again, it's frustrating, but you take that frustration, you put it in a box, and you're like, my job is not to be frustrated. My job is to figure out what a close up of a horse you think a close up of a horse is.
Absolutely. And that's, I mean, what I was saying before about, I feel like it's a decision for anybody in any department about whether you want to come to work and have that attitude or not, and it's like, I find that something that doesn't change, that there are people that just kind of are a little bit miserable on film sets and want to complain about it. And there are people that don't. And
Yeah.
I find it much more pleasant when you don't complain about it.
Are there still times
And I
that
used to complain about it.
Yeah, well, we've all been there, but we've all and 9 times out of 10, it's because there's stuff going on in your life that's seeping in or whatever. I mean, we're human beings,
And
and
making movies
and
is really hard. I mean, it's
it
really, really difficult on the soul.
it,
And
it really it's
physically,
weird that you say that because it really is it is and it isn't because there are the times when you're on something that you're just I mean, I don't know if I was going to ask you this. Are there times where you still like you're looking in through the eyepiece and there's that moment of like, I can't believe I get paid to do
oh
this. Like, I
yes,
can't believe I
in
get
a
to do
way, I
this.
feel like those things because now that I don't have to I don't worry so much about the details. I mean, I feel like in the sense of like I feel like I can rely on my instincts, so
Yeah,
therefore I don't have to nitpick about about the things I might be doing wrong. I can just enjoy what I'm watching,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and then therefore be open to those moments of like, whoa, that was beautiful, or like,
yeah, yeah.
what a glorious
So,
thing I just witnessed,
so you still have it. Well, and the other reason I specifically wanted to ask you that is because this is. I mean, there must be moments where I don't know if you cognizantly realize this, but you're like, I'm doing the thing I wanted to do when I was 12. Like, I read about this thing and now I'm actually getting to, I mean, that must be kind of cool every once in a while to sort of realize, like,
I
I
think
got here.
it only comes up now when I tell people that, and
Yeah,
they're like, and I see their
sure.
reaction, and they go, "Wow,
That
I
is kind
didn't
of
have to
special.
spend 5 years in plumbing school." It's like,
Yeah, no, I totally get it. One movie I wanted to ask you about because it's a favorite of mine. By the way, I keep on thinking I should mention this, and I haven't. On the website, theop.io, there's something called the breakdown, and you've now done. I think we've done 5 or 6, but I think I've released like 3 or 4 of them. There's one of State and Maine. I think there's one of Spider-Man Catch and Release, but it's some great stuff. And I was thinking about it. I should have mentioned it earlier when you were talking about studying film, which is so important to watch, older movies and sort of see how things are done and they take the time to tell the story and whatever. But also for people who are specifically operators, but any kind of storytellers, if you look on the breakdown, there's people like you and other great operators who have been kind enough to show a scene and explain what went into it. And actually, the thing that I sort of love about the ones that you've picked is they're not, you know, when I do a huge Steadicam shot with Larry McConkey, you watch the shot and you're like, okay, I don't know everything he's going to talk about, and there's always something more. But I understand how hard this shot is. But some of the stuff that you've talked about are the things that it's like, what are we getting at here? And there's some specific aspect of it that I've found really really interesting. So I would mention that to anybody listening to go check those out, and I'll link to them on your website page for the podcast. But State and Maine, which is just a favorite movie of mine. Was that just like a gift to be able to work on something like that with those actors and that screenplay? And
we had a blast. I mean, yeah, I mean, David's. I've done 3 or 4 or 5 films with David, and he, you know, it's really a family feeling. That
is it?
all the actors are friends of his, and or student or ex, graduated students from when he used to, he taught at NYU, and out of a class that he taught was born this theater company, which is currently, it's one of the bigger off-Broadway companies in New York, the Atlantic Theater Company,
Yeah,
and Bill Macy and Felicity Huffman and Clark Gregg and many other actors were in that class, and so they all knew each other to a level where they could give each other shit and laugh, and like knew each
great.
other like a little too much, personal information about each other, and so and it just would be a lot of practical jokes would get played, a lot of you know I mean, like Michael Hasman produced his first couple of films, and David showed up to work on the first day of House of Games wearing jodhpurs and had a riding crop and a fedora on, and it was meant to be ridiculous. It was
Yeah, yeah,
like the director's here,
yeah. Oh, that's great.
So,
Uh, where'd
so
you guys shoot that?
House of Games was in Seattle.
No, State and Maine.
Oh,
Sorry.
State and Maine was in like that in that Cape. It's like 30 minutes outside Boston, Cape.
Okay, one of the capes there. Yeah, but
Yes.
basically, did you just take over this little town while for a
Yeah.
month while you were shooting?
Yeah, but we
Essentially.
were like I stayed in some weird hotel like halfway to
Oh,
Boston.
okay.
You know
All
what I
right,
mean?
gotcha.
Like
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was too far to
Came in
go
one.
back into Boston, but um, yeah, we had a good job. Oliver Stapleton was a lovely man to work with. Just
Well, and for again, just to take it back, you did a really good breakdown of that, and it was talking about the when you started shooting and what his idea of a good frame was, and I
right.
thought that was so interesting because you were like, this isn't what I would normally do, and he was like, no, I like this, and so suddenly you have to go, okay, so I'm gonna put that instinct aside and go with this because that's what we want, and I thought
That's
that
a
was
hard
really
thing to do.
fascinating.
I was just last week when I was the last thing I did. I fought that a little bit because I felt like, how much do I change the frame to make it into something that I think is that I like
Yeah,
versus not that I dislike what I'm seeing.
but it's not your
But I,
instinct,
I, I call
right?
myself I call myself changing the frame too much. I'm like, wait a minute. It's like I got to be careful about, why am
Yeah.
I doing this?
Yep.
The initial concept of this shot was to tell a little piece of the story, and so I'm not so worried about making sure that all the geometry works well in my you
Sure.
know and so I think that's a good thing and difficult thing because it's like runs against your instincts sometime, and trying to put that in the box can be, you feel like you're exposed, you feel a little bit exposed, because if I want to rely on my instincts, I want to be able to just instinctively make the best frame that I think the shot needs, but I don't want to undo or sidestep what the general feeling is. And in the case of like Oliver, there was no animosity or no
Yeah.
aggressiveness, trying to make that. You just more like, no, it's like it works like this. It's fine.
Yeah. This is what I'm looking for. And it's also like, and I think when you get on movies and TV shows and whatever, you're kind of learning the language that they want to speak. And sometimes that's not always what you're used to. So I always find those to be, assuming that people have good instincts or good ideas, to be interesting challenges because again, you can't just let go and go, I'm going to land this the way I always land it. Because it's like, I got to land it slightly differently because they want more headroom or this or that or the other.
I think many operators, and I am definitely on that list, are perfectionists of some kind,
Yep.
and and that's can hurt you a little bit.
And so, on that note, do you find yourself often going, that shot, there's nothing better I can do on that shot? Or are you always reassessing going, oh, if I had one more take, I could do this or I could do that?
Both. I mean, I'd say sometimes
You've
I feel
done a
like
lot of work with Steven Soderbergh, and
that's
he's
just
just such a unique
that's well,
individual and
no, I
such
feel.
without. I mean,
No,
I'd
I
use
feel
the
like
word
sometimes I feel
auteur,
like
I
that's
think, but
that's
you can
pretty
tell
much
me.
what I can do, and I think that
I'm
shot
just
is
wondering
is
what's
works.
what's
And
that collaboration
and there
like,
are
and
times where
what's
I
it
was
like
said,
working with someone
"Oh, I
who
wish
is
we could go
that in
again because
control of everything?
I really would like to do it this way." It's
Yeah.
so I
It's a
just feel like
question every time I get asked that I
and it
feel
doesn't
like it's
necessarily have to
hard.
do with the complexity.
I find it.
And
It's
I'm sure
never
you'd understand
possible
this.
to
Like
kind of
the more you do a shot, the more you
encapsulate
find things in it
what
that you
it's like.
you know fixate
I
on.
feel like there's
Yep.
people that have worked with
Like
Steven
sometimes
and
like, oh
people
my
that
gosh,
haven't,
like
and there are
that's
people that work with
that sign
Steven
on the
and
wall's
like
been there the whole time.
Steven
It's
was a
like,
guest
yeah,
on
I
Yeah,
would.
I've
one of
been
your
there. How could
podcasts
I
that
not have seen that for 12 takes?
doesn't
And I
care
don't know
for it.
about you, but I often at
Yeah.
those points when I realize I'm going down
I
that
can
hole, I'll
talk
turn
a
to
little
my
bit
dolly
why
grip and
that
go,
might
hey,
be.
is there something weird in the back wall that's bothering you? I won't try
I
to,
have done
what?
some work with
And then
Steven,
I'll
and I
finally go, is
really
that
hope to
sign
do some
bothering you?
more
What's
work with
that
Steven.
sign?
I
No.
stay in
And then,
touch with
okay,
him.
so
And then you
I'm
can
the
currently
one
Currently is
who's
out of the
got the problem,
country.
not the
Yeah.
He
not the
decided
sign
to
or
fold,
whatever. And then on the flip
close
side, I'm
up the
getting into
shop.
these
He
things
had
where
a
I've been in
little
before, I'm
production
sure you
office in
have,
New York
where
City, and
it's just like,
and
we'll
he
do a
got rid of it in
shot
his
and it'll
apartment, and he's
it'll
living
be the
in
way we
London.
set it up and it'll be perfect
Oh
and
He's
everything
wow.
will
got
be slightly
his
different, but
second
just the
project
performance was great and the
based there
story
is
was great
coming
or
out
whatever.
soon, but
And then, the DP will come over
well,
and be
actually,
like, I
he
don't
now
like the way
has
the candle
Presence,
is
which is
coming
his
out of his
most
shoulder. And
current
it's
thing,
like,
which
will
I
the
did not
candle
work
come?
on because he
What?
didn't. I think he
And then
did
you
it
look
all
at it and you're
himself.
like,
It was
well, I
just
mean,
Mhm.
I guess
it was a
that,
very
but
small
that
project.
shot was,
And
it
just
was
for
so
anybody who's
great, not
listening who
because of
doesn't know,
me,
when
but
you
because
say
of what
he did it
happened
all
there. Like,
himself,
we
Right.
really got to go, okay,
he's the
because,
director,
but then
he's the
you
DP,
realize
right?
you work
He
with different
operates
people
a camera,
and there's
right?
some
And he
people who know
obviously
it's
does a
got to
bunch
be
of other
this and it's
things,
got to
but
be
He's
that.
also
And
the
camera-wise, he
it's
does
their
all
editor.
that,
job,
right?
right?
He's the
Yeah, yeah,
editor.
that's
He's
sure.
often
Yeah.
the writer. He's a producer, but I mean a real producer. Like
Yeah.
the decision-making kind. Um, the way I always look. I mean, a good friend of mine and somebody I don't think you've talked to, but you will eventually. Chris Duskin, who's one of the
He's
more
on the list.
seasoned operators out there, and of
Yep.
my, we assisted at the same time, and so we have a very similar
Yep.
backgrounds. He
And now
fell
now a
into
great DP as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
a great
Yep.
DP. He fell into to Soderbergh's camp a long time ago. You could find out from him how, and did many projects with Steven. And there was these moments where because Steven's pretty particular about who he likes to work with, uh, Chris was like, wasn't sure if he could do something. It was like, oh, I want to get Henry Cline in there, and I almost did one project, and at the last minute, Chris was able to do it. And then finally, Chris was, as his shooting career started to blossom, he successfully turned down a project, and that's when I transitioned into kind of his role. So, with Steven, basically, it's a I liken him to there's not too many people that work with this methodology anymore, which is basically full control. And I always Stanley Kubrick is a huge hero of mine, and I know people that have worked on his last two films, so firsthand know what it is like. But in general, that it's a very small crew. That is incredibly, he's literally in everybody's rice bowl, and for better or for worse, you have to be prepared to have a full-on production meeting at 3 a.m. if Kubrick wants to.
Yeah.
That's not Steven, but the elements of small crew, intimate, want everybody to be on their game is definitely Steven. But somebody on one of the Dolly Grips that have worked with him a lot described him as in the course of the working day, you come in. He hates to tech scout. He thinks it's worthless. You do it because you have to. But he says nothing means anything to me until I come to the location on the day, do a rehearsal, see the actors in the space, and then I know what to do. Right. So
wait, let me ask you a question then. So does he even have a preconceived notion of how he thinks the scene is going to go, or he literally
I think he does
he
not.
come in with something and then he's willing to change it, or does he just come in and make it on the day?
I think he tries not to have any preconceived notions. I'm actually pretty clear about that.
So that's part of his process almost is I want to find it.
Exactly. He wants to see the actors in the space and have them do whatever they're going to do
That's incredible.
With very little, if zero, interpolation. Wouldn't it be better if you stood over here by the window? There's none of that stuff. There's the lights. He doesn't care about where the light is. He doesn't care about, that there's a noisy refrigerator over there. I mean, he cares. He knows that it's important, but what he wants to do is see the words from the people that are telling the story in the environment.
And so when you say not moving them around or whatever, sorry to interrupt, but do you mean it's sort of like he rehearses with them and he takes his cue off of what they're doing within their characters because he expects them to bring something to it of their own?
I mean, sometimes actors really like and want to have some parameters. There's I've definitely seen where it's well, I don't know. I mean, I could sit, I could stand, I could walk around, I could I could be making breakfast, whatever. And so, and Stephen will be, instantaneous with a response about how about these three options? Why don't you pick one of these three? You could be sitting at the table. You could be going to the bathroom, whatever it is, it's
Wait, what a dream for an actor. Jeez. Good Lord.
They love him. They love him. I mean, so much so that, and it's another, the second part of the tale. Well, so he sees that process. And then going back to what this Dolly Grip says, he looks and like a caged animal for about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. He will pace the room in complete his own silence. You don't have to be quiet. People can talk and chat on the set. He just paces and wanders and looks and stands and kind of freezes. And it's you see this brain going completely cutting what he just did, what he just saw, complete editing in his head, and then figuring out the best way, the best shooting order, the best, all of it, everything, sunlight, natural light, time of day, figuring it all out. If it's a 2-page scene, it's a 6-page scene. Just figures the whole thing out in his head silently, and then basically says, "Okay, I'm ready." And says basically just so that in case there's anything that like so that the crew knows about what to get ready. It's like we're going to be here, 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 and here and here, and that's going to be the scene, right?
Yeah.
And then that's what we do. So it's like, if you need to lay a dolly track, then, it's like, we're going to be here. We're going to do a little move. It's going to be here. Then we're going to use two, whatever. And, it's, and then he shoots like a banshee. It's like nonstop shooting. And that relates to, he does very little lighting. He uses a lot of, a lot of natural light. He'll just move one or two practicals around. He works with great gaffers, so everything's available. So if all of a sudden he needs to push something big through the window, it's almost always, ready to go. So it's not like a scramble to get anything done. He's got really good people who know their deal and know that something could happen. So everything is ready. But he keeps it pretty simple for himself. And then brings the actors in, and then if they're not there already, because everybody loves to hang around on a Steven set, because he'll tell stories or engage in a conversation that's just fantastic, and he's been in every room in Hollywood with every single person, and he doesn't hold back with what he thinks, or he will
that's great.
Tell you what goes on behind closed doors to an extent. I mean, nothing inappropriate, but the actors love it, and so then what happens is they wind up staying on set. We don't usually I don't think we have stand-ins at all, or if we do, like just rarely use them because the actors just work on set. So
they want to be there. How wonderful.
They want to be there.
Jeez,
they know there's no time to go back to the trailer. It's like you do the master, and then you're doing a close-up 7 minutes later, you're rolling camera on the single. So it's like, so that's the way the process goes. And very often, I mean, given limitations of locations and the structure of, company moves and all that, but, you often, come in at 7:30 or 8, and there's an hour and a half of him figuring it out and and then you shoot like crazy, and then you break for lunch. And you come back and usually have like one more setup or two more setups, and you go home at like 2:00 in the afternoon, and you've done really good work, and it looks great, and you get your afternoon off, and he loves that.
But I think a lot of that is also because he doesn't have to answer to other people, right? He only needs to he doesn't have to get 5 versions of something, because he can just get what he wants.
And if somebody has a question about the cost wardrobe or set design is a question in the course of the day, they walk in, they see, Steven, next week we're shooting the scene, what shirt do you want? And it's like, that one, it's like, and that's the end of the conversation.
Great.
So it's, but then what's also amazing is that, so we're done at 2:00, 3:00 in the afternoon. He then goes to his hotel room, or often to a place that people can hang out at, a bar or restaurant, with his laptop and the dailies, and cuts together the scene, and then uploads it. And then, by the end of the day, you are watching, it's not even, it's like, it's actual dailies. It's not like the next day, it's that day. You watch the scene with temporary music cut together. And that goes on every day. By the end of the movie, he's rough cut, on his way to fine cut, a lot of it. Now, of course, there are times when there's complicated stuff and blah, 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 and it's more than that. But when it's dialogue-driven scenes in practical locations, that's pretty much the way it goes down. Yeah. And everybody's got a smile on their face all day long.
Amazing. We could do an entire episode just on him. So I'll just ask you one other question before we move on to something else. So you're B camera when you're with him, and the question is, I mean, is he heavily involved with what you're doing? Did he tell you exactly what he wants, or did you sort of go, I need a close up over here, go get it for me, and you line something? I mean, is he open to suggestions? And
there's not a lot of suggestions with Steven, only because what you discover is that he, pretty much everything I suggest, he's like, yeah, he'll say, and he doesn't say it in a condescending manner. He goes, yeah, I thought about that, and it didn't work because of, and he'll tell you why it didn't work. And he's like,
Yeah.
because, and he'll tell you why, because in the cut it doesn't work, or
Yeah.
because the
Yeah. Yeah.
dialogue doesn't support. It's like not like, oh, I don't want to be over there. It's like very specific. And with that said, I try to be. So I tend to be very reserved about when I make suggestion.
Yep.
I find that often I feel compelled to say something, and he's always open. And once in a while, he even says, "That's a great idea."
That's great.
He's also famous for like somebody saying, "Hey, Stephen, this." What about over here? And he like walks over and goes, "Oh yeah, we're doing that right now." And like, Greg, that was a terrible idea over there, but bring the camera over here. This is much better. So
how could
he's
you
never,
ask for more, right?
yeah,
I mean, that's just fantastic.
it's all very, very positive and loving. There was one more thing about what you just said. Oh, about the B camera. I mean, the reason why it's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea is that you don't work a lot as a B camera in terms of physically operating the camera. I'm a guy that I just like to be on set. When I do B camera, even if the DP says, you can go to the truck and read a book, it says, I just can't, I just don't like to. It's not like, I love watching people make movies. I love seeing what the process is. And I feel like if I'm needed, it's good to know what's going on. So I tend to just hang out on set, even when I'm not needed. And with Steven, it could be very like all of a sudden he could say, okay, B cameras up. And you just fly in there and he says, and he'll say like, all I want you to do is from here to here. And then you can turn the camera off, right? It's like when he stands up, I don't have a good angle on it. Just get it, this is all you're doing, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't do the remote work, which is another reason why he has somebody, an operator around. So if there's any remote head work, like on No Sudden Move, which was my first project with him, we did a lot of remote work. And so that was really fun because I was, and he doesn't let me run with it. He's pretty specific about what he wants. But he also, as soon as he knew that I had my chops, it wasn't like he wasn't micromanaging me by any means. He'd be more like saying like, I just think we should do it from here to here. And then, but if I had the time or the inclination to just kind of design a shot of my own and show it to him, I might. But I remember we were doing some big shot with a techno and I assumed it was going to be one way. And so I kind of lined it up. He was busy doing something else, and he came back and said, "Oh no, we're not. All they're doing is this." Showed me, and what he had planned was really cool, and I never even thought of it. It was like went through this little portal hole, and well, it's like, oh, that's freaking awesome. So,
but that's kind of what we all want, which is we kind of want to be wrong because someone else has a much better way of doing it that we didn't think about. Because then you learn and you get to do something cool, and that's fantastic.
And I think more often than not, his ideas are better. I mean, and he's a man that's fixated on work. I would recommend anybody that enjoys him go to his blog, which is called Soder Blog. And every year there's lots of things on there, and some of them get taken down. Like he did his own cut of Heaven's Gate, right? His own cut, like a full cut of Heaven's Gate, and it was up on his, I think it finally he did another one where because he taught this with like Raiders of the Lost Ark in black and white with no sound, because he thinks it's one of the most perfect films that you can know what's going on the whole time, and you're not distracted by the sound or the colors, you still can watch the movie. So we had that up at one point.
Wow! All right, well, I know what I'm doing for the rest of the day.
and then one thing that's amazing is that he lists everything that he's read, watched, listened to the entire year. He keeps track of everything, and you can go and look at the list of what he is like, and it's pretty wild because it's everything. It's like it's not just that he knows he can reference every esoteric French film ever made, but his favorite show was Below Deck. Like, so it's
that's fantastic. As soon as we're done here, I'm off to the internet. That's just great.
Yeah.
Thoughts on working with a new dolly grip who you haven't worked with before, and just sort of, is there?
Yeah, I've listened to you ask that question, and I feel like it's been covered, but not by me, just in the sense of like,
Just if you
it's
have any thoughts
no,
on
no,
how that
I don't.
relationship works, because it's a tough one.
Like I was saying before about when you're new to a set, you kind of have to see what this person is capable of doing before. Like not long ago, I was on a project, and it was not. It was pretty clear that the dolly grip did not have a lot of experience, and immediately discussed it with the cameraman, and he said, "Well, let's just see how it goes, and then we can make an assessment about whether or not it's nervousness or whether this person you can help him." And because listen, there are dolly grips that are that are good at their jobs, and but will not accept any input from you,
Yeah.
and that's difficult because sometimes you just need it done a certain way to make the shot work that you can't even take the time to explain, and you just want
Yeah.
them to say. And if that creates agita with the dolly grip that then creates stress and tension for the rest of the show, then which is something that you just probably are going to have to live with, versus a dolly grip that literally can't anticipate what an actor is going to do. I mean, the obvious and clear um, examples are just, the dolly grip has to be able to anticipate the movements of a human being
Yeah.
in order to move fluidly and not have it be as noticeable, assuming that is the intent of the shot, as it often is. And that's an experience thing. And there are young guys that nail it and are really good at it from a guttural way. They just were born. I worked with somebody not long ago who is a really good dolly grip, who's very young, and
Yeah.
it's like, whoa, dude, you have a long career if you want it, because
Yeah. Yeah.
you just are constantly doing the right thing without me saying anything. So
Yeah.
to
That's
me,
wonderful.
that's, you just have to have the conversation. You have to assess how that's going to play out. The rest of it's the mechanics of it, as long as they're not taking an excessive amount of time to do something that doesn't need it, or fighting you on the methodology. It's like whether
Hmm.
this is dance floor or track, or whether we're going to bring the arm in or whatever. I mean, that's all. It's different with everybody and every cameraman. It's
Yep.
like recently on a job where they just, they're using the arm all day long if they can, you know. But some cameramen don't want to be in the arm if they don't have to,
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's like, but the language between the operator and the dolly grip were seamless in that case. Of like, the dolly grip was an incredible, arm operator, and he'd run the head and the pickle at the same time, which is always indicative of somebody that knows how to nail a shot. And so the language was, so they were constantly doing the right thing. Whereas if there's 20 minutes of discussing, like, well, if we put the dance floor down, then it still might be bumpy over here. Like, that's fine. I can have the conversation, but I'd much rather just you figure it out and have it be perfect, which
Yeah.
is,
Exactly. Yeah.
what we all want to have happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard when
Absolutely.
it's not happening and you have to interject yourself. Like, you get, oh, really? Like that. I'm not sure if that's the best, without being like, you know what, get that stuff out of here and bring in the arm. It's
Yep.
like, all of those things are hard to judge. And some of it, it's just the level of the patience of the company, of the director, the producer, time, the company. And because these days, does anybody really care about the little wobbles and in the dolly? No, they don't.
No, because they'll
They,
take it
they
out in
care a little
post.
bit more about the stops and starts and the ups and downs.
Yep.
But even that mostly winds up being conversation between me and the DP, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
maybe the assistant.
Yeah.
So then the third part of that triangle is just the personality. Like, if I'm going to be on a long job, do I get along with this person? Is it somebody I want to spend, we stand around a lot and chat a lot. Um, but that's not something I'm going to change. I'm not going to ask that we replace the dolly grip because maybe we come from different walks, different worlds.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think all of those things have to be put together, and sometimes relatively quickly, because if you want to
Yep.
make a change, it's got to be done, early on, hopefully.
Yeah. I don't think there's any answer. It's just, but I think it's for people who are starting out, it's hearing this from more and more people about, because it's a relationship at the end of the day. And
Yep.
and
It's
I
a
think
very,
to me it's about assessing if it's not great, what's wrong, and can we move past that? Can you and I either communicate better, or are you going to learn this, or whatever? And like you said, and trying to get out ahead of it and going, look, if it's not going to work, let's figure it out and make a change. And if it is going to work, let's get on the path of making it work. But
right.
yeah,
Right.
it's a whole thing. Well, Henry, this has been fantastic talking to you. I've really had a good time. For anybody who's listening, the takeaways from here, besides everything that Henry said, go see Sneakers. Go see Tremors. Check out Henry's blog, which I'll list in the comments, and check out the breakdowns that he's done. But I'm glad we finally got to do this. I'm going to leave you with a question that I leave everybody with, and you could take us out. Advice for people getting into the business today on how to succeed, and or what you wish you knew back then that you now know.
The two things I would say are, one, and I think that the harder one is knowing what you want to do and focusing on that. I was lucky and or kismet, whatever you want to say, that I knew I wanted to be a camera operator. Didn't want to be a DP. Didn't want to be a focus puller. I wanted to be a camera operator, and that's what I got to do. And so I always knew that that's where I wanted to wind up. And by knowing that early, I think it made that process a lot more fluid. Um, the other thing, which is funny, is I tell people now, and it's half joking, but I'd say to sit down more. I feel that I get it, and I would love, there are directors that I know that ban chairs from their set or whatever. It's like, but my I sit down as much as I can on the set now. I get an apple box and I just sit where I'm supposed to be, where I can still do my job, but I just don't stand on a cement floor for 14 hours a day because my body can't take it. And it wasn't just a matter of it's the greater point. It's meant to be a little bit of a metaphor of like taking care of yourself. I've never been good at, like, when I'm working, I don't exercise as much. I don't eat as well. Be aware of all that stuff, because that's what, when we talked about it being a brutal business, that's the part of it that it is. It's a really fun job. It's an incredibly creative job, but it takes a toll on you in a lot of different ways. And I think having an awareness of that earlier on, maybe or maybe not, because when you're young, you're just like, whatever, I can do this. I can work all day and drink all night. So that's what I would say is know what you want to do and sit down on an apple box.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. We'll be back soon with another great episode. Don't forget to check us out on theop.io for all sorts of information on operating and storytelling. So thanks for listening and have a great day.